I remember.
One of the main characters is going to be Loy Ownby. Now, for the very few of you in this room who never had the privilege of meeting Mr. Ownby, I'm sorry. He was the original. He was a true Smoky Mountain son, and it was an honor to learn from him. He was like the balance of Mr. Fields. I always said Mr. Fields was so erudite, so worldly, so sophisticated, and Loy provided the yin and yang there, you know. He taught us about nature. He taught us about the mountains. He had walked every one of the trails in the Smoky Mountains. He was an absolutely astonishing man. He was quite private about his own life through all of that. It was many years before I was invited into the trailer. He could be, he had a very racy sense of humor, as those of you that know, who Andrew and I certainly know that, in fact. And he would occasionally refer to some experience he had in World War II, but he would never go into it, and we never really understood what it was. My dad was in World War II. Almost everyone's father of my contemporaries was in World War II. We never really thought much more about it, and I never thought much more about it until I went online to read the Knoxville News-Sentinel one day in 2001, and there's Loy's face staring back at me. This was around the time of Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation, and there were lots of articles appearing in a lot of newspapers about people who had done remarkable things and then come home and led unremarkable lives. So I want to read you just a little bit from this article by Fred Brown in the Knoxville News-Sentinel, May 25th, 2001. In 1939, Loy Ownby and Lucy Kate Gibson married and set out to raise a family. But life didn't run as smoothly as the mountain creeks near his home in Gatlinburg. Almost immediately, Loy and Lucy came to know what Job discovered. When you think things can't get worse, they do. Their first 3 children were stillborn. Lucy died along with the 4th. By 1941, Loy Ownby had already seen death cast its long shadow over 5 graves. So to find some peace, he went off to war. Loy told his folks goodbye and signed up to fight wherever his country sent him. In 1943, he found himself in Calcutta, having volunteered for what President Roosevelt called a dangerous and hazardous mission. Only single men were allowed to volunteer. The commander of this new outfit was General Frank Merrill. He outlined the mission for his volunteers. They were headed for the jungles of Asia, some of them at sea level, some so high they were almost hanging in the clouds. They'd be gone a long, long time and be behind Japanese lines most of the way. They were told to expect 80% casualties. It was officially called Operation Galahad, but the boys in the unit became known as Merrill's Mauraders. They saw some of the toughest and most terrifying action in World War II. The plan was to drop American soldiers behind Japanese lines and open up the old Burma Road, keeping India, Burma, and China from falling into Japanese hands. They began with 3,000 volunteers, returned home with less than 300. The Mauraders began a march of 1,000 miles through dense, impenetrable jungle up and over the Himalayas into Burma. They were alone, without tanks, artillery, or any kind of help. Loy was a scout, one of the most dangerous jobs. He would take off down a dark and dangerous trail looking for soldiers, Japanese soldiers. Every step was an ambush of steel and lead, or hunger, or disease. I had to, this is Loy's voice now, I'm not going to try to approximate it, but I can't help but do a little bit of it. I had to pull leeches off of me by the handful. I weighed 140 pounds when I went in there. I came out at 118. I was just bones. We walked that entire 1,000 miles all the way to the Chinese border, you see. Sometimes you did without food for 3 or 4 days at a time. It rained a lot. A lot of the boys got bit by snakes. Some of those snakes were as big as telephone poles. We traveled during the night and we fought all day. But we had some fighting at night too, and that sort of strained things. We were fighting the best Japanese divisions. They would fight until every one of them died. And it's hard to fight in the jungle. Most of the battles Loy prefers not to recall. and he does not or will not talk about them. He gives only bits and pieces, as if the memory is too painful. I remember one old boy from Kentucky. He went to the bathroom, never came back. Another one fell off my raft and couldn't swim. I tried to find him, but I couldn't, and he drowned. If they weren't fighting Japanese, they had to struggle against the jungle itself. Large deadly snakes, disease, rotting clothes and boots, sometimes rotting flesh. A lot of us died of malaria. The only way to treat it was just to walk it out, because only the dead and seriously wounded were taken out. If you could hobble and go on, that's what you did. I went all the way through. I didn't think I was going to make it, but I didn't worry about it. I just thought this was a job worth doing. By May 1944, the Mauraders had been in jungle warfare longer than any American fighting unit in history, with the exception of the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. For his bravery, every man won the Bronze Star, and Loy also won the Silver Star and the Burma Liberation Medal. When the war was over, Loy Ownby returned to his East Tennessee mountains. He married Beatrice Ramsey, we all knew Bee, and they had 4 children, Frida, Steve, Paul, and Linda. Loy took a job with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, spent many years as a trail foreman building bridges and campgrounds. Next, he signed on with the University of Tennessee's Outdoor Theater in Pigeon Forge, this says, and became its overseer until his retirement. Of Merrill's Mauraders and those war years, he still has nightmares and memories. I lost so many pals, he says softly. It was a hard go. I don't know how I got out. I still think about that sometimes at night. And in the words of Doug Eckert, I remember you.
I remember you.